Good morning. My name's Chris Kuehl. I'm from Dayton Children's Hospital, and I'm the Cybersecurity SIG chair. This morning, I'd like to extend a very warm and special welcome to each one of you that's here with us today for the 14th Annual Taste of IT. And if you would please join me in thanking our sponsors. Cincinnati State is our diamond sponsor. Gold is Cadre, Checkpoint, and Okta. Bronze is 8451, ComSpark, CDO, CyberRabbit, Dell, Exagrid, Extreme Networks, Franklin University, Gigamon, NextGen, Sinclair, and Smart Data. And to our annual partners, ATC, Affidence, CareSource, Cincinnati Bell, Google, Rand Tower, University of Dayton, Wright State University, and Uptime. We definitely couldn't do this without their support. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce Michael Mansky. He's a leader of Ascend Technologies, Managed Security Services Practice. Michael's expertise includes working with clients to operationalize security, mitigate security risks, and meet business objectives. Michael understands security threats and technologies required to support complex business and technology objectives while reducing security risks. Michael has more than 18 years of security, infrastructure, managed services, and consulting experience across multiple industries and technical competencies. And Brandon Harms is the Director of Cybersecurity Sales Engineering at Ascend Technologies. Brandon has spent the last 2 decades in the IT industry and has held network and security engineering positions for large telecom, DoD, and enterprise organizations throughout the U.S. He has obtained many industry certifications during his career, including CISSP, GPEN, CCNP, and CEH. After a decade of security, network, and telecom engineering, and 3 years as a pen tester, he took on the role of CTO for an MSSP. For the last 6 years, he has had a cybersecurity consultant. He's been a cybersecurity consultant specializing in security operations center effectiveness. Brandon holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Philosophy and currently resides in South Carolina. Join me in welcoming Michael and Brandon from Ascend Technologies as they talk about 2020 data breaches and mitigation controls. Over to you guys.
Thank you, Chris, so much for that introduction, and thanks everyone for joining this virtual conference today. Like Chris was saying, we want to dig into what we're seeing in the market, what is happening at Ascend clients, what breaches are we responding, what are those mitigating controls that you can put in place in your organization, and then swing into what's that future cybersecurity investment that your team will need to make within 2021 to stay up on top of attackers and what's happening in the market. So, as all of you know, there's a lot of cybersecurity incidents that are happening in the market, especially with the global pandemic. A lot of attackers are targeting specific hospitals and work from home organization or people that are working from home and trying to find holes within or taking advantage of the situation that they're in. We're definitely seeing an increase in ransomware attacks across the market. We're seeing specific hospitals get ransomware attacked, organizations that are developing vaccines. We're seeing that also affecting organizations. So we're seeing a significant rise in ransomware. We've seen that over the last few years, but continue to see that. And as we see in the ransomware side, they become more and more nasty from an attack. Where you look at a Maze ransomware attack, they're not only just encrypting the data and clients' machines, they're first exfiltrating data and then manipulating that data. So it's sort of a two-prong approach in these attacks, and they're becoming very sophisticated there. We're also seeing a significant increase in business email compromise, end users giving out their credentials, phishing attacks with the COVID vaccines and other things of that nature. They're trying to target people. Ultimately, the sense of fear and urgency is always what an attacker is trying to do, and we're continuing to see that. And then we can continue to see attackers take advantage of those situations. So I just wanted to go through some of the Verizon breach reports. So if you haven't seen this, this is a really good report as a security practitioner to look at as you look at how to protect your organization. It's got some really good stats in all different types of industries and what those mitigating effects ultimately are. As they saw in their last year of breaches, ransomware is on the rise. They're seeing 27% increase in ransomware attacks. Web applications are twice they were the year before. And some of those indicators that I see is a lot of organizations are trying to get quicker to market with their applications. Either it's a mobile app or it's their ERP system or their primary web application, and not going through the appropriate secure development lifecycle that needs to come through. Attacks continue to happen from phishing. That's the easiest way for an attacker to come in and steal credentials. So we continue to see things of that nature go through. But ultimately, if you read through the Verizon report, there's a lot of basic, simple controls that would prevent a lot of these things, these attacks from happening. It's simple configuration errors that end up to a user. So if you get a second, make sure you read through this report and really helps identify, where those attacks happen and where you should be focusing your dollars for mitigation. So as we are in the industry of protecting our clients from cybersecurity attacks, here are the top 4 types of attacks that we're seeing with our customers and in the market. Data breaches continue to happen. People steal PII, PIHI data, privacy. One of the things that's on the uptick is GDPR, CCPA. Both of these are privacy regulations in California and Europe, and attackers know that they can manipulate this data and sell it on the black market. So we're continuing to see breach of data. There are the traditional credit card thefts and other items that are out there, but we're seeing more and more personal data being manipulated for fraud. Another big threat to an organization is business disruption. An attacker does a ransomware attack, does a denial of service attack, ultimately causes the business not to be able to function. Either my website's down or my manufacturing floor can no longer operate, which costs an organization millions of dollars a day in those effects. We're also seeing the continued ransomware attack, and I've said it before, but in the past it was $20,000, $30,000. These attacks are multi-million-dollar ransomware attacks. We've seen a lot of municipals earlier this year and late last year have very high dollar ransomware attacks that made the news, but there's a lot that don't make the news that attackers know organizations will pay. They don't want to have the business disruptions, so they're still continuing to rise, and the dollar figures are getting higher and higher. And then ultimately, social engineering, the end user is the weakest link, and we continue to have organizations and people clicking on emails, giving their credentials away. So putting those right controls in place and multi-factor authentication is super critical for any organization. So as security practitioners, we all think, we have the best security environment, and what we communicate up to the board is that we're secure. Everyone is going through our firewalls. We've invested a lot of money in cybersecurity, but ultimately in reality, that isn't the case. We know that there's shadow IT and there's SaaS-based applications, and now from work from home, are all our controls that we put in place really effective when someone's at home? Does that translate to a remote employee? How about a SaaS-based applications? All of those things. Do I have the right data protection, authentication within those SaaS-based applications? So as as businesses continue to evolve, our security program is a lot different than a lot of business leaders would want to think, and I think we all know that. But as I look at as the business and IT changes, there's a lot of things that will affect cybersecurity and what your security posture is. Cloud adoption, it's on the rise. Especially now with COVID, people are moving their workloads to AWS and Azure, SaaS-based applications like Salesforce, Office 365. Those are being adapted by the business, and we need to make sure we have appropriate controls to do that. There's a lot of business transformation moving from paper-based to electronic from all of the business life cycles, and organizations are adopting, how do I become secure? How do I do IT and being quicker to market? Two, how do I make sure that data is secure and meeting all the regulatory compliance that I have? The rapid development, I think, is definitely a risk. We want to be quick to the market, but not putting the appropriate controls in place. And then, machine learning, big data is a huge topic in business today. Is how do I manipulate, and leverage the data that I have on consumers and improve business processes. But with that becomes a lot of data challenges. Now I'm taking data from 15 systems and putting them in one system. What controls do I have in place to protect that? So, as the business adopts, so do the attackers. They're gonna, try to manipulate the cloud environment. They're going to try to manipulate, the different types of remote workforce and so forth of that nature. So, they're really trying to manipulate, and monetize on a lot of that business transformation. They know that change becomes problems, and security and IT practitioners aren't fully educated on how to protect themselves. So ultimately, they're capitalizing on that change. At Ascend, the problem is, we, as a security organization, we want to protect the data. And that's what we've been thinking about for several years of, okay, we got to protect that credit card information. We got to protect the PHI and the healthcare data, but ultimately, that's not the most important thing when it comes to the business. It's the business interruptions. It's the loss of revenue because my website's down for a week, or my manufacturing facility cannot, generate, goods. That's ultimately is the big impact from a ransomware attack. While a ransomware attack may cost $500,000 for ransomware, your website, being down for a day could be a multi-million-dollar, revenue loss for an organization. And then ultimately, we want to protect that reputational damage. We don't want, consumers going to different competitors and not trusting in our services. So as you look to evaluate your security posture, make sure you keep these things in mind. Yes, we need to protect the data, but we need to keep the business up and running from an organization side. So I think here are just a few examples around why business operation is so much more important to data. If I want to take my daughter to the hospital and they can't perform surgery or can't provide care to her because they have a ransomware attack, that's a huge deal to me. I will never be using that hospital again. And that would impact my impression of that organization and way I would consume data. Now, if they lost my healthcare records, which they do all the time, I've blown it off. It always happens. They give me a credit monitoring service, and I move on with my day. But if I go to, a bank and they can't, give me access to my funds, or I want to close on my house, that's a problem. Now, if they lose my credit card information, well, I got protection along that. So, I think, that mindset really resonates with the board of directors as you're saying, hey, I need to make investments in cybersecurity, really talking about what's that business impact, what's that end user impact, that consumer impact that really will drive change in the organization. Because an organization will say, fine, I'll pay the credit card fine, I'll pay the high trust fine. That's fine. What is that, $100,000? That's not a big deal. But having that other impact is really going to get the board's attention to make sure they're making the appropriate investments into cybersecurity.
Thanks, Mike. Let's talk about the numbers a little bit here in time. The IBM Security Research Report, breach report last year talked about $150 per record lost in cost, right? It doesn't sell for $150. It costs organizations on average $150 per record that is lost. And so if we multiply that out, you can understand when they have these massive breaches of millions of records, the toll it takes on the business. And so putting time to that, 15 hours to exploit, 73 days to detect, approximately 208 days for the whole time continuum from breach to recovery. These are long periods of time to identify threats, and every minute counts, right? $10 every minute that goes by. And when you're talking about 208 days from breach to remediation on average across multiple industries, that it adds up. $643 every hour, $15K a day in costs. And this isn't the cost of the lost data. This is cost of response, cost of new security products, technologies, lost revenue in dealing with this, man hours, and all these things add up to be $15,000 a day, with over 208 days on average to identify and detect this. So minutes matter. Can we go back real quick? The time in cybersecurity means so much. What's this tell us? That means every minute that goes by that you're breached, you're losing money. And so let's talk about, okay, let's go ahead. Sorry, Mike. How long does it take to breach? So we're talking days to detect and identify and recover from it. What are we talking about and how long it actually takes an attacker? And what we found is it doesn't take long. To breach the perimeter, you can see the values associated here. Less than an hour, 12% of an effort from the attacker, all the way up to 2/3, 3/4 of the time, less than 15 hours to breach your perimeter that you've spent so much money on. Identifying, once someone's in, identifying the valuable data, you can see less than an hour, 26%. Takes an attacker less than an hour to identify valuable data. Moreover, to get that data out of your organization, it's going to take 40% of the time, less than an hour. And then the entire breach, from breaking in the perimeter, identifying and exfiltrating data, you can see on average half of it is going to take a day's work for a qualified adversary. So compromises take minutes. The cost to identify and detect and the cost to the organization is extremely expensive and takes much longer. And so you come to a point where you kind of throw your arms. It's like, what can we do? Let's talk about that. So here's what we're seeing. You have disparate systems all over the place. Folks at home, in the cloud, on-prem. There's really no more security edge. The edge is everywhere because your information is everywhere. And so we have to, as a security organization, get total visibility into everything. And that generates, as you can imagine, a ton of noise. So you can see some of the numbers here. We're ingesting millions and millions of pieces of information, log messages, alerts from thousands of network centers, tens of thousands of endpoint agents. Combining that and correlating that and using triage techniques, we can boil the ocean and turn that into tens and thousands of investigations. Is this a false positive? Is this something that needs to be looked at? And after we find that needle in the haystack, we turn that on a per customer basis over a year, about approximately 800 incidents in which there is a problem, there is a breach, we need to investigate. And then within that 800 incidents that need action, 24 over a year have been serious breaches that needed, roll trucks. Everybody put down what they're doing, and let's figure this out and do a full incident response. And we're seeing average time of response initially is on average last year was 35 seconds, 10 minutes to resolve, 20 minutes to remediate. And so that is so important for a security operations center. As you saw the numbers before, time matters. The cost quickly gets out of hand the longer you have a breach in your environment. And then the time it takes for the attacker to compromise systems is very short, as you saw before. And so in order to accomplish the goal of no business impacting breaches, time is the most critical aspect. You have to have total visibility and the understanding of how to boil the ocean, find that needle in the haystack, and respond, similar to the numbers on the right, within seconds and minutes instead of weeks and months, in order to stop this from becoming business impacting, as Mike said, is so critical for an organization. And so, what we're seeing is they're really targeting the systems we use to protect. MSPs might use remote software distribution tools or management. The holy grail of an attacker is a service organization that has access and control of systems that they use to manage infrastructure, right? So this may be your cloud service provider. This may be your own team that has very good skills in system administration, but maybe not that cybersecurity background to harden these devices. And so it's important that you understand that the attacks are everywhere, and you really need to have that expertise in order to accomplish that shrinking of the attacker's window that's so important to identify and detect and respond to threats before they start racking up costs for your organization. So, great. What do we do about it? Well, more numbers. We can see, there is no silver bullet. It's going to be a combination of things. Unfortunately, you can't just go purchase the next latest, greatest thing and expect to be safe. It's going to be a combination of technologies integrated together in such a way that they can quickly be pivoted in and out of to understand where the threat has gotten through and what the context is behind it, and how do we be very prescriptive about the remediation in less than an hour, right? So what I find interesting here is on the bottom right, the host hardening. Right, you have infrastructure, you have Windows systems, servers, laptops, home workers. Host hardening slows hackers down by 34%. Host hardening isn't a technology that you purchase. It's not a subscription from a service provider. It's simply implementing proper configuration, secure configurations on the equipment you already have. And so that kind of tells me, wow, we can take a pretty big step simply by putting in your basic practices on what we have. And so again, there's no silver bullet. But you can see that's a large step in becoming secure. All these things add up collectively to make you secure, but no one thing is going to make you safe. But more to the point, the basics are important, as you saw, right? Have that latest and greatest endpoint protection platform and unified endpoint management for remote devices, and definitely have server protection and hardening, because that's a very basic thing to do, and it's way more effective than not doing anything. User controls, remove the admin rights from your Windows users. Will save you a lot of hassle in a breach scenario. It will slow up the attacker, which will generate indicators of compromise as they're being slowed up, and that will raise the suspicion of somebody watching those logs, like we do, in order to, again, start the clock of detection and remediation. So you want to slow them down as much as you can, to make sure that they are noisy within your environment, and you have fewer of it takes less than an hour to breach, exfiltrate, more of the 4 to 5 hours. Well, during that 4 to 5 hours, that's when they're generating noise that we're detecting, and we can respond and hone in on the context: who, what, when, where, and why, and how do we solve this before it becomes business impacting. So you need to implement these basic controls that are going to slow attackers down, and make them generate the noise that we need to find that suspicious behavior and identify that threat. Security infrastructure, this is so important. Log monitoring, backup and restore, your table stakes patch and vulnerability management programs. Vulnerabilities come out every day. You have to have that continuous visibility into, are my systems vulnerable today? What about now? What about now? What about now? Right? And so once you get that continuous vulnerability management in place, you can have that responsive patch management that can be on top of things, to, again, harden your system, make them less vulnerable to attacks, so that it slows the hacker down. They generate noise that can be identified with the log monitoring, and then we can go in and fix the problem. And obviously, perimeter security controls are important. You have to have that visibility at your network boundaries. And the perimeter is not just your front office, not your front door. The perimeter could be anywhere. It could be interdepartmental. It could be between your data center. It could be between the accounting department, finance department, home users, vendors that you work with. Perimeters are everywhere. You have to have boundaries everywhere. More importantly, visibility and policing within those boundaries. Again, in order to get that visibility, slow the hackers down, generate indicators of compromise logs that can be investigated. And then mature security practices of awareness training, formal awareness training, keeping cybersecurity top of mind for folks on a regular basis, makes them more aware of potential phishing attacks, for example. Having an understanding of where your PII and important data lies, and the systems that it touches, and how it moves through your organization, understanding where that is, so you can increase the sensitivity of the protections where that sensitive data lies. Then obviously we recommend understanding where you're at in a given point in time, so that you have a roadmap moving forward. And risk assessments are a great way to do that, where an organization can come in and say, okay, given the business risk that we talked about before, and the high costs associated with those, let's talk about where you're at now, how you're protecting it. Do you have the people, the process, and the technology into place to quickly identify threats as they happen and react, so you don't end up in that industry average of 73 days to detect a threat, and many more to fix the problem. So risk assessments are a great way to get that point in time and give you a roadmap moving forward.
Yeah. Thanks, Brent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Brendan. I think this is, really good information around staying in the basics. I've done so many risk assessments in organizations, and I've seen, organizations invest a lot of money in security tools. And they may have a really good endpoint tool, they may have a really good backup tool, but then they don't operationalize it. They don't have the people to support that tool, which becomes another challenge. I can't just buy technology while every security vendor will market that it's all machine learning and AI and it does it themselves and you don't need to do anything. It's not the case. You got to take that investment into that top tool that, Brandon was just talking about, actually have the people to support that tool in the back end is that next level of the challenge. So as we see, we do a lot of security incident response and breach recoveries. Here's a good example of a client that had a major ransomware attack. The attacker got in by sending an email to a user that ultimately downloaded a payload that ended up encrypting their whole organization from workstations to servers to backups of servers, and completely shut down the organization. The organization was down, and of course, when this happened was right at the holidays, right at Christmas of last year. And this is really when attackers attack. They attack when they know that you're not around. So Thanksgiving, the Christmases, the weekends, the nights, that's when our team is starting our breach investigations at our clients. It's because they know there will be less eyes on glass. They know that organizations don't have 24/7 security operations teams looking at this stuff. Maybe they come in on Monday. Well, it's too late because I've already, look at Brandon's slides. They've already exfiltrated the data and they've already started the encryption process. They're covering their tracks and they're in and out, right? So, as we see in an in this particular case, there was a ransomware attack. And they had to hire a forensic firm to come in and do the investigation, but the real cost isn't there. The cost is the recovery from that attack. This organization needed to rebuild every single workstation. They needed to recover their core business applications. The attackers encrypted their backups. So they were in there and they did their damage. Because they didn't have those good processes in place on, are you testing your backups? Do they really work? Can you recover from those backups? So there was a large job of recovering data that was encrypted, as well as recovering systems. And it was a huge impact to the organization. And ultimately, it's not all it's not all covered by cybersecurity insurance. Some of the response and forensics that gets easily covered by cybersecurity insurance, but there's a huge cost of recovery from your people, from consultants that have to come in that doesn't even get touched by that cybersecurity insurance from organizations. So there's a huge impact to organizations. Sort of tying that back to having your core systems down and your consultants or the manufacturing floor can't do work, that becomes a huge problem and a huge cost that's not even counted into this kind of 80-20 rule on top of that cost. Sort of touching on the cybersecurity insurance is that, everyone thinks, yeah, I have cybersecurity, I'm covered. Well, that's really not the case. Cybersecurity is new to the insurance world, and they're learning on what is covered, what is not covered. There are different riders and plans to cover. Will they even pay ransomware, right? So there is certain organizations and insurance firms that will. Will they cover, credit monitoring? Yes, these are the typical things that a basic cybersecurity plan would do. But does it cover loss of revenue, reputational damage? Some of that stuff is hard to measure, and a lot of security plans do not cover that. So while an organization can say, hey, I have a cybersecurity insurance, it doesn't necessarily going to cover the cost of a breach. And I would recommend to any of us that are out there is really understand that's what you have from a cybersecurity coverage and get that evaluated. Understand where your limitations are. These insurance companies are evolving every year on making their claims better and mitigating loss. Ultimately, they're in the business of making money, and some of these, ransomware attacks and other things are having huge impacts on the organization. So you want to make sure you are covered, but ultimately, it's not going to cover everything, from an organization standpoint. So if you want to protect yourself from a ransomware attack, we really say, let's think like an attacker. How does an attacker get in? How do they move around your network, get data from there? So I think a lot of the people on this call have probably heard of the cybersecurity kill chain. But as we look through that, what security controls do you have at each step of that kill chain to identify where your security problems are? Like Brandon was saying earlier, there is no silver bullet. There are components that are critical along each one of these sections, from perimeter to data backups. All that stuff that Brandon was talking about is critical. So if you look at an attacker, this is typically how this process works. An attacker learns about your organization. This might be from social media posts. It may be a new data center that got spun up. These could just be script kiddies that are always scanning the internet going, what's out there? Who's vulnerable? And going, oh, you got an Oracle box or a SQL box or a web server that is vulnerable. Great. They get those reports and they go, I'm going to attack you. I'm going to go figure out how do I penetrate that vulnerability in that external system. And they'll look that way. They'll also do the phishing email, right? So this is learning about, hey, what's the new management of the team looking at LinkedIn? How can I do a targeted phishing campaign to get people to click on an email that looks pretty good? Because ultimately they want someone to take an action so they can get into your environment. So after an end user or they're able to take advantage of a vulnerability, they ultimately have a way into your infrastructure. But they may have only, got the admin assistant to click on that email. That user may not even have admin rights to that workstation if they're doing the right thing. What they're doing is, what else is out there? What else is vulnerable? Let me get on this machine and go, maybe there is a server out there. Maybe there's an old SQL box. Let's go look around the environment and let's see what I can take advantage of. So they get a foothold, they get command and control, and then they look around and they go, oh, I see that they're running an old version of SQL. Well, let me see if I can compromise that machine. Great. I just compromised this old SQL server because it wasn't patched very well because we didn't want to take it down because that would impact the business. We see that all the time. Well, we can't have new versions. So now the attacker is on that SQL box, right? And that SQL box may have some connections and have some very privileged access because this was running the core business application, right? Now they get domain admin access because they're able to elevate their privilege as they got onto that SQL box based on not being patched and taking ahead of those vulnerabilities. From there, they can sneak around your environment. It looks like real access. As I start taking data, I'm a domain admin. I can go look around. So having controls in place on, users typically from the SQL box aren't going into SharePoint and downloading data. What's going on, right? So having controls in place to see things that are happening, that's what an attacker is doing. They are then sending that data out of the organization. All right, just dump that SQL database to a file, and I'm going to go send that off. Now, do they do mass exports of data? No, they're smart because they know that you potentially have tools to identify that. They'll hide it in packets. And we've seen in some of the big breaches, they've hidden in ICMP ping packets, and credit card data is in each one of those headers. right? And to an organization, they don't see it going out. So they're very creative on what they do. So there's a ton of different controls that you can have in place to help you within there. And then ultimately, they try to cover their tracks, or try to monetize on, well, I stole the data, I got what I needed. There's nothing else that I want here in this organization. Either I'm going to delete all the logs, or I'm going to do a ransomware encryption and encrypt. And it's not always ransomware, right? Ransomware is a good way for them to make some extra money, but sometimes it's just purely covering tracks. And there's no way. You got to recover your data. You can't just go pay ransomware, because that's the easy thing. And many organizations do, because it's easy and they don't have the backups. But thinking like that attacker as you're looking at how you protect your organization is critical as you move forward. So as we look at the the Verizon breach reports and saying, hey, what has the most effect? So if I look at the SANS top 20, what has the most effect on protecting myself from a breach? And if we look at some of these, is doing a good vulnerability management program. Am I scanning? Am I identifying for vulnerabilities? And am I patching my systems? 101 things that need to get done to protect your environment. Phishing attacks are happening all the time. So what email and web protections do you have in place? Do you have appropriate things to prevent spoofing? Do you have cross-site scripting so it's not allowed? Do you have a web application firewall? So how are you protecting those critical email and web applications where attackers are manipulating? Boundary defenses, those are always important. We've all had firewalls for many years, but are we continuing to tune those and take away, hey, there's no longer needs access to remote desktop. We see this all the time. There's a port that's left open for some reason. Attacker manipulates that port and gets into the environment. So continuing to review that and making sure you have a hardened environment is critical. Doing account monitoring. An attacker is doing escalation of privileges. You've got to see, why did a domain admin account get added? Why did an enterprise admin? Why is user rights getting changed? Is there a change management? Is this typical activity? You have to be alerting on those things, because that's what an attacker is doing, because they don't always have the most credentials to start off, but their ultimate goal is to get the credentials with the most power within your organization. Brennan mentioned this, secure configurations. Again, CIS benchmarks, both on workstations and servers. And I think the thing to think about is in the cloud environment. You have the Azure security score and AWS, but we see this all the time, S3 buckets that are left open and have no controls, that someone downloaded a whole database of data with consumer information on. How are you monitoring that? And how are you making sure you have those controls in place and limiting those things? Again, limiting ports and protocols, not only on your firewalls, but between environments where there's potential vulnerabilities of, like we talked about, those legacy applications. We know they're always going to be around. How do you limit the exposure to those legacy applications to mitigate your risk? And then, what are you doing to protect that data? So is your SQL database encrypted? Are you encrypting data at rest? How are you identifying, sensitive data? Are you alerting when sensitive data gets taken out of your organization? If someone tries to dump something, to a Dropbox site, do you have visibility into that? So really understanding the critical data that you have, how are you alerting on that, and how are you protecting it? So if someone does dump your SQL database, is it encrypted? And it gives an organization more comfort of a breach. And then finally, awareness and training. Educate users not to click on an email, educate your IT and security staff on what the threats that are out there, and do, monthly phishing campaigns. Train them, educate them, and continue to stay on top of that. I think those are the things that we're seeing that most protect an organization. As we go into 2021, I know we're running short here on time, but I say go back to the basics. Go look at those lists. Do you have everything that you need? If you have everything there and you've matured those processes, and you have that 24/7 security team, making that, how do you make yourself better? What are you doing from there? So some of these come from, the Gartner research that happens, and I think, these are really relevant to making sure you're keeping your security posture up and running, securing your remote workforce. Right, we're all in COVID. We all have machines. We're doing things differently today. So, what are we doing to control their access and have the same controls that you have on your internal to your external network? Vulnerability management. Yes, we all can hide. We can all get Qualys. We can all get Tenable. We can do a scan. But how are you prioritizing that? How are you accepting risk where need be? What controls are you putting in place? Because there is that application that can't be patched. You need to have a more risk-based approach to vulnerability management. Enhancing your detection and response. All of the SIMs, the EDRs, the network tools, those are all great. How do you tie those all together? How do you do automation and SOAR related to incident response? Because like Brandon said, responding to an incident is the most critical thing that you need to go do. And you have to do it fast. So, having people hands on the eyes and glass and looking at it, is ultimately important.
Just to add on that, Mike, based on the research we did, the automation of incident response and having that program led to 50% reduction in costs across the industry last year.
Yeah, I think those are all, really good points. I'm not going to read through all of these. I think, take a look at these. Cloud is big. Are you doing the right security controls? And it's interesting that Gartner talked about email security and DMARC. I mean, this is a configuration to prevent spoofing, right? This is, administrator control. There's some easy monitoring things, but again, this has made a list of things an organization should be doing, and there's not a large cost associated to that. So, as you go back and look for how you plan for 2020, take a look at the basic controls and these controls, and how do you mature your organization? Ultimately, sort of tying things back together. Make sure, yes, you're protecting your customer data, but ultimately you're ensuring the continued operation of the organizations that you're at. Ultimately, we want to make sure we're delivering service to our customers. And that's, should be your mindset as you look at the controls that are in place, what are the threats that are impacting your organization, and what kind of investments that you need to make, going forward. So, thanks everyone for, your time today. I think there's, 5 or 10 minutes here of questions that we would like to, go through if there's anything that's open.
Yeah, I'm just watching for any questions. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any. So I'd like to say thanks to Michael and Brandon. That was really informative session. So thanks a lot for doing that. Special thanks to CyberRabbit, our featured sponsor for this session. Remember to complete the survey for each session by finding the link in the My Agenda session descriptions. It's the same place that you clicked on to join this session. By participating in the survey, you can make your voice heard and help shape the future of Technology First events. Thanks for taking the time to fill out the survey. Now we're going to take another, looks like 10-minute break. And so we can use this time to grab a snack, visit the exhibitors, explore the event platform, and the game codes that you can earn by exploring the app. So make sure you go to the event game tab to learn more. The game code for attending this session is control. Again, the game code for this session is control. All right, thanks a lot. See you all soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Have
you.
a good day.